The story of a man of God, Abraham. Long ago, Abraham lived in the city of Ur. It was full of tall houses, busy streets, and many people who prayed to idols. But Abraham's heart was different. He believed there was only one true God. He listened carefully, waiting for God's voice. Even though everyone around him followed idols, Abraham wanted to follow the living God. This choice made him very special, and God saw Abraham's faith. Inside their tent, Abraham and Sarah sat together, surrounded by their animals, sheep and camels, resting outside in the desert night. They were kind and faithful, yet their hearts carried a quiet sadness. Though they prayed and hoped, they had no children of their own. Sometimes Sarah sighed deeply, wondering if she would ever hold a baby. Abraham comforted her, saying, "God has a plan for us." Even when their hearts felt heavy, they trusted that the Lord was listening to their prayers. One day, Abraham stood in the desert when a great light shone down around him. God spoke clearly, saying, "Leave your country and your family, go to the land I will show you. I will bless you and make your family as many as the stars in the sky." Abraham listened carefully. Though the journey would be long and uncertain, he trusted God's words. In that moment, Abraham's life changed forever. He knew he must obey, because the living God had called him. Abraham gathered his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all their servants and animals. Together, they left their home to follow God's command. Camels carried their belongings, sheep filled the pastures, and servants walked beside them. The desert stretched far and wide, but Abraham led the way with faith. At night, they pitched their tents beneath the stars, and Abraham prayed for God's guidance. Each step brought them closer to the unknown land God promised, and Abraham's heart grew stronger with trust. As they traveled through rolling desert hills, Abraham paused to give thanks. He gathered stones and built a small altar. On it, he offered a prayer of worship to God, who had led them safely so far. Sarah and Lot watched as the smoke from the altar rose into the sky. Abraham lifted his hands, saying, "Lord, you are faithful, and I will follow you always." Wherever he journeyed, Abraham remembered to honor God, showing his family the importance of faith. Abraham and Lot's flocks grew so large that the land could not hold them all. Their servants quarreled over water and grass for the animals. Abraham, wanting peace, said kindly to Lot, "Let us not fight. Choose where you want to live, and I will go the other way." Lot looked over the land. In the distance, he saw the green valley of Sodom, rich and full. Abraham smiled, letting Lot decide, because he trusted God would bless him wherever he went. One night, Abraham prayed to God. He wondered how God's promises could be true since he and Sarah still had no children. The sky above was dark, filled with countless stars shining like tiny lights. God spoke gently, "Do not be afraid, Abraham, look at the heavens. Your children will be as many as the stars." Abraham lifted his eyes, amazed at the endless sparkle. Though he did not yet see how it would happen, he believed God's words with all his heart. Years passed, and still no child was born to Sarah. She grew sad and wondered if God's promise would come another way. Sarah gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, and Hagar bore a son named Ishmael. Abraham held the baby with joy, though Sarah watched with mixed feelings. Ishmael was strong and lively, and Abraham loved him dearly. Yet deep in his heart, Abraham knew God's promise was not yet fulfilled. He continued to wait and trust in the Lord's perfect plan. God appeared to Abraham again, his voice full of love. "From now on, your name will be Abraham, which means father of many, and Sarah's name will be Sarah, which means princess." Abraham and Sarah smiled as God's shining light surrounded them. Even in their old age, God promised they would have a son. The new names reminded them that God was faithful. With joy in their hearts, they believed more than ever that the Lord would keep his promise. One hot day, Abraham sat by his tent when he saw 3 travelers coming near. He quickly hurried to meet them, bowing low to show respect. "Please stay with us," he said kindly. He ran to Sarah, asking her to bake bread, while he prepared food for the visitors. As they sat under the shade of a tree, Abraham served them with care. These visitors were no ordinary men, they were messengers from God, bringing an incredible promise that would soon change everything. As the visitors ate, they asked, "Where is Sarah?" Abraham answered, "She is in the tent." Then one of them said, "Next year, Sarah will have a son." Sarah heard from inside and laughed quietly. "How can this be? I am too old." But God's messenger replied, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah covered her mouth, surprised and thoughtful. Deep down, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the impossible could happen through the power of God. That evening, the visitors told Abraham that God would destroy Sodom because of its great wickedness. Abraham was troubled, for his nephew Lot lived there. He lifted his hands and prayed, "Lord, if there are 50 righteous people, will you spare the city?" God answered, "Yes." Abraham humbly continued, asking for 45, then 40, 30, 20, even 10. Each time, God agreed. Abraham's heart was heavy, but he trusted the Lord's justice and mercy. He prayed earnestly, hoping Lot would be safe. As evening fell, Lot sat at the city gate of Sodom. Suddenly, 2 shining visitors approached him. Lot quickly stood and bowed low, showing them respect. He begged them to stay at his home for the night so they would be safe and cared for. With kindness, he prepared food and made them feel welcome under his roof. Even though the city was full of wickedness, Lot chose to show hospitality. His heart desired to do what was right before God. At dawn, Lot and his family fled the city with the help of angels. Behind them, the sky grew dark with smoke and flames. God's judgment fell on Sodom, and fire rained down, lighting up the valley. Lot's daughters clung to him, but his wife turned back, longing for the city, and became a pillar of salt. Far away, Abraham looked toward the plain and saw the smoke rising like a furnace. He prayed silently, thankful God had saved Lot and his daughters. At last, God's promise came true. In their old age, Abraham and Sarah welcomed a baby boy. They named him Isaac, which means laughter, because Sarah had once laughed in disbelief, but now she laughed with joy. The whole household celebrated this miracle child. Sarah held Isaac close, smiling with tears of happiness, while Abraham gave thanks to God. The promise of a son had been fulfilled, and Isaac brought new hope, showing that nothing is too hard for the Lord. One morning, Abraham rose early with a heavy heart. God had told him to send Hagar and her son Ishmael away. With sadness, Abraham packed water and bread for them. He placed the bundle on Hagar's shoulder and gently held Ishmael's hand. Though it hurt him deeply, Abraham trusted God's plan. Hagar and Ishmael walked into the desert, while Abraham stood watching with tears in his eyes, praying for God's care over them. Hagar and Ishmael wandered through the hot desert. Their water was gone, and Ishmael grew weak and thirsty. Hagar sat down and wept, afraid her son would die. Then, an angel of God appeared with a gentle voice, saying, "Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy's cry." The angel showed Hagar a well of fresh water. Joy filled her heart as she gave Ishmael a drink. God's promise was with them, even in the wilderness. One day, God tested Abraham's faith. He called, "Abraham." And Abraham answered, "Here I am." God told him to take Isaac to a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. Though his heart was heavy, Abraham trusted God completely. He rose early the next morning, took Isaac and 2 servants, and began the long journey. Isaac carried the bundle of wood, while Abraham held the fire and knife. Together, they walked quietly, step by step, toward the mountain God had chosen. As they climbed the mountain, Isaac looked around curiously. He saw the wood and fire, but no lamb. Gently, he asked, "Father, where is the lamb for the offering?" Abraham's heart ached, yet he answered with faith, "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." Isaac nodded and trusted his father. The two walked on together, side by side, with the quiet wind blowing through the hills. Abraham's eyes lifted toward heaven, believing that God had a greater plan ahead. Just as Abraham lifted the knife, a voice rang out from heaven. "Abraham, Abraham," he stopped at once. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," the angel said. "Now I know that you fear God, for you have not withheld your only son." Tears of relief filled Abraham's eyes. He untied Isaac and embraced him tightly. Then, nearby, they saw a ram caught by its horns in a bush. God had provided the sacrifice, just as Abraham had said. Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the ram caught in the thicket. With joy, he offered it to God in Isaac's place. Isaac watched as the fire burned on the altar safe in his father's arms. Abraham named that place "The Lord Will Provide." From that day, people remembered how God had spared Isaac and given them hope. Abraham and Isaac walked down the mountain together, thankful that God had shown mercy and kept his promise of blessing through Isaac. In his final days, Abraham lay peacefully in his bed, his gray beard long and his eyes gentle. Family and servants gathered around, honoring the man who had trusted God through every trial. Abraham spoke words of comfort, reminding them of God's faithfulness. At a ripe old age, he breathed his last breath, full of peace and surrounded by love. His life was a testimony of faith, and his children remembered him as the friend of God forever. As years passed, Abraham's family tree grew bigger and stronger. Isaac had children, and they too had children, filling the tents with joy. Jacob and Esau were born, and from them would come many more descendants. Just as God had promised, Abraham became the father of nations. When the children looked at the stars, they remembered that each shining light was like one of Abraham's countless descendants, too many to number, but each part of God's great plan. Abraham's life was a journey of trust. He left his home, followed God into the unknown, and believed his promises even when they seemed impossible. Though he and Sarah were very old, God gave them Isaac, the son of promise. From Isaac's family came many nations, and one day, Jesus, the Savior of the world, was born through Abraham's line. Abraham shows us that faith is not always easy. Sometimes he waited a long time, sometimes he made mistakes, but he kept turning back to God, and God never left him. God guided him, forgave him, and blessed him. Abraham was even called the friend of God. That name reminds us that God wants to be close to us too. The stars in the night sky reminded Abraham that God's promises are greater than our doubts. Today, we can look at the stars, the sky, and the world around us and remember the same truth. God always keeps his word. Abraham's story ends in peace. He grew old, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, knowing that his life was in God's hands. His faith left a legacy that still blesses us today. And so, as you finish this book, remember Abraham, the man who trusted God with all his heart. His story teaches us that when we walk by faith, we too can be God's friends. Most of all, never forget this promise: God always keeps his promises.